She was thrown out for birthing a triplets girl, until the silent rancher took her hand and said, "The night was cut from glass and ash. A pale moon dragged itself across the heavens, spilling a brittle silver over the dirt road that wound through the barren plain. Each gust of wind raised the dust into a cruel dance, sharp against bare skin, sharp against memory. She walked it barefoot. Her feet were torn, bleeding, raw as open wounds in the earth. Her dress hung in rags, the hem dark with blood that would not stop flowing. In her arms, clutched tight as if the world itself meant to tear them away, lay 3 newborn girls. Swaddled in scraps of linen, their cries rose in staggered gasps, thin and trembling like the wings of sparrows caught in a storm. Behind her, faint but burning still, the glow of fire. A house once called home. A family that had turned their backs. Their words had cut deeper than any blade. Cursed. 3 girls, useless mouths, a plague upon the name. Spittle had struck her cheek as she was shoved out, a babe in each arm, and a third still wet with birth pains. The door had slammed, bolts driven home, and the flames of their hearth mocked her through the crack of the window as she stumbled into the night. Her throat was raw, not from screaming. She had no strength left for rage, but from the ache of betrayal. Each breath rasped like dry leaves across stone, yet she walked on. Them. For the 3 tiny heartbeats pressed to her chest. The desert did not care. Coyotes howled in the distance, their voices sharp as knives in the cold air. An owl lifted from a dead tree and vanished into the shadows. The stars watched without mercy. Still she whispered lullabies through cracked lips, songs her own mother had sung to her when life was kinder. Words carried no melody now, only fragments of comfort. Hush, my little birds. Hush, my stars. Her body swayed, fragile, and every step was a war. The blood at her thighs had slowed but not stopped. The pain carved through her like fire-eating timber, but she clung to the rhythm of her daughter's cries. Proof they lived, proof the night had not yet swallowed them whole. Time broke. The road stretched on, endless. Her arms ached, her knees buckled. Once she fell hard upon the dirt, grit grinding into her palms. She thought it was the end. But the smallest cry, thin, insistent, dragged her up again. She staggered to her feet, body moving long after the spirit had given out. When dawn bled into the horizon, she was more ghost than flesh. The sky glowed faint pink, painting her hollow face with color she did not own. She reached a bend in the sea, rode, and there, at last, her body betrayed her. She sank to her knees, her arms folded protectively over the 3 bundles, as if her dying form could still shield them from the world's cruelty. Her head drooped. The world tilted. She heard her own breath rattling like dry reeds in the wind. The last thing she expected was the thunder of hooves, at first faint, a rhythm steady, unhurried, like a drum from the heart of the desert. Dust curled along the horizon. She blinked through tears and grit, seeing the silhouette form, a rider alone, shadow stretched across the rising light. Closer, a horse black as stormwood, mane whipping in the wind. Upon it, a man, his shoulders broad, his posture weary, like one accustomed to burdens that bent the soul more than the body. A wide-brimmed hat hid his face until he drew near. Then she saw the eyes, hollow, carved from canyon stone, set deep with a silence that spoke louder than words. The rider slowed. He dismounted without haste, boots crunching on the gravel. For a long breath, he did not speak. The only sound was the soft whicker of his horse, the faint whimper of the children. She tried to shrink back, but her body refused. Fear clawed at her anyway. Men had never been mercy, but he only knelt before her. The leather of his coat creaked as he shrugged it from his shoulders. He draped it over her shaking body, tucking the edge around the fragile shapes she held. His hands were rough, scarred, yet deliberate, careful as if touching glass. Still he said nothing. Not a question, not a name. Only his silence, deep as the earth, heavy as the dawn. The warmth of the coat was too much. The scent of leather and smoke filled her lungs, breaking something loose inside her chest. Tears spilled unchecked down her dirt-caked cheeks. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since exile, allowed her body to give way. When darkness took her, the last thing she felt was not the cold earth beneath her, but the quiet strength of arms lifting her up. With that silent act, a new fate began. The horse's hooves struck a slow rhythm against the packed dirt as dawn spread across the horizon. Elias Kane rode without a word, the weight of the woman and her children resting carefully in his arms. Her head had fallen against his chest, limp with exhaustion, while the 3 tiny bundles pressed close between them made faint, restless sounds. His coat wrapped them all, shielding them from the early morning chill. The land stretched wide and empty. Sagebrush whispered in the wind. The path he followed led not to town, not to neighbors, but to the far edge of nowhere, where his ranch stood alone like a scar against the plains. By the time he reached it, the sun was fully risen. The house came into view. A structure weathered by wind and years, its white paint peeled to gray. The corral posts leaned, broken from storms or raids, and the barn roof sagged where fire had once licked it. To any passerby, it looked half dead. To Elias, it was simply what remained. He dismounted carefully, cradling the woman as though she weighed no more than one of the infants. His boots crunched against the frost-bitten ground. With slow movements, he carried her inside, past the door whose hinges squealed from disuse. The house breathed with emptiness. Shadows clung to the corners, and dust lay thick across shelves that had not held food in years. A single chair rocked gently in the draught as though a ghost had only just risen from it. He laid her on the long sofa by the hearth. The babies stirred at once, their cries sharp against the silence. Elias knelt, coaxing the fire back to life with practiced hands, the sparks catching on the brittle wood until flames climbed. Fragile, but persistent. The woman stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, dark, wide, frightened. She clutched the children, close, her body curling around them as though he might strike. Elias did not move closer. He only reached for the bread on the counter, hard but edible, and the tin cup of water drawn the day before. He set them on the low table within her reach, then stepped back. The silence was heavy, but not cruel. It pressed between them like a closed door, impenetrable, yet safe. She did not speak. Neither did he. Outside, the ranch came alive with his presence. He worked in silence, his shadow moving across the barnyard. The horses snorted at his approach, recognizing the man who tended them with quiet steadiness. His hands, though scarred and rough, moved with gentleness as he laid fresh hay, filled troughs, checked the hooves. From the window, she watched. Each motion revealed something of him. He carried himself like a man long used to solitude, every gesture deliberate, unhurried. The air around him was not bitter but heavy, like a field after rain that would never bloom again. Inside the house, his ghosts lingered. She noticed them as the hours passed. A child's shoes tucked on a shelf, coated with dust. A rocking horse abandoned in the corner. A photograph scorched along the edges, the faces barely visible but enough to show what had once been, what had been lost. Her throat tightened. She recognized grief when she saw it, even if it wore no words. His silence was not coldness. It was armor. Days bled together. She kept expecting him to turn her out, to drive her and her daughters back into the merciless desert. Yet he did not. When the babies cried in the night, she found warm milk waiting in a jar, his work done quietly, before she stirred. When she stumbled while carrying all 3, his hand appeared, steadying her just enough, then withdrawing before she could thank him. Still, she feared. Silence was a wall she could not climb, and loneliness gnawed at her even in his shelter. One evening, the fire cracked low, casting long shadows on the walls. The triplets slept bundled together in the cradle he had repaired from broken wood. She sat near the hearth, the warmth painting her face. He entered from the barn, the smell of hay and horse clinging to him. He stood for a moment as if uncertain whether to cross the threshold of light. Her heart pounded. The quiet stretched too far, And so, with trembling breath, she spoke the first words between them. "My name." Her voice cracked. She swallowed and tried again, softer. "Mira." The syllables seemed to vanish in the air, swallowed by the crackle of fire. She almost wished she could take them back. But then he turned. His gaze met hers, steady and unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, and she thought her name would fall unheard into the silence like every cry before. Then at last, he nodded once. Just once. A stone shifting in a riverbed, subtle but certain, and for the first time since exile, she felt the faintest stir of belonging. The weeks drifted by like slow clouds over the plains. What had begun in blood and exile turned into a fragile rhythm of survival. Mira's strength returned, piece by piece. Her body, once frail as reeds, began to move with quiet determination. Each morning she stepped outside with her daughters, bundled close, greeting the vast silence of the ranch. Her hands, raw at first, grew calloused as she pulled weeds, tilled patches of soil, and coaxed life from the earth where most believed nothing would grow. The cries of the triplets echoed. In the hollow house, not mournful but vibrant. 3 small voices filling rooms that had long been empty. Their laughter came later, bubbling and bright, startling Elias when it first rose above the walls like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He did not comment, did not smile, but she caught him pausing longer in the doorway when their little sounds carried to him. He kept his distance. His silence was steady as ever, but now it felt different. Not a wall to shut her out, but a shelter built around her. He worked the ranch with solemn care, mending fences, training the horses, chopping wood with strikes that rang through the quiet evening air. She found comfort in the sound of his labor, proof he was near, proof the earth did not carry her alone. At the creek she washed clothes, the cold water biting her fingers. Sometimes when the sun was high, a faint laugh would escape her lips. Light, tentative, as if she had forgotten how it sounded. The sound carried across the yard, and Elias, splitting logs nearby, froze as though struck. He never mentioned it. But that night, the fire in the hearth burned longer, as if he had fed it more than usual. But whispers have longer legs than laughter. The nearest town was a half-day's ride away, yet tongues wagged quicker than hooves could carry. At first only curiosity. The silent rancher took in a woman with 3 babes. Then suspicion sharpened their words. She's cursed. 3 daughters are a bad omen. He pities her, or worse, she bewitched him, Mira. Sensed the change in the air when she ventured to trade for flour and salt. Conversations hushed as she passed. Eyes narrowed, lips curled. She hurried back, clutching her daughters close, the weight of judgment pressing heavier than the goods in her basket. The storm broke when the preacher came. It was a hot afternoon, cicadas screaming in the grass. Elias was in the yard, driving a new post into the ground, when the preacher's wagon rattled down the trail. The man descended in his long black coat, Bible in one hand, righteousness in his stride. His eyes fixed on Elias with a gleam that was more blade than sermon. "You shame the Lord by harboring her," the preacher began, voice ringing across the dry yard. "Your name is already a whisper among sinners. Keep her here, and it will rot into filth." Elias straightened slowly, leaning on the hammer, sweat glistening on his brow. His face was carved stone, unreadable. He said nothing. The preacher's voice rose. "You know why she was cast out. She births only death. 3 daughters, no sons, a sign of God's curse. You bind yourself to her, and you bind yourself to ruin." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind through the brittle grass. Mira, standing in the doorway with her children in her arms, felt her chest tighten until she could scarcely breathe. She braced for Elias to send her away, to let the preacher's words take root. But Elias finally spoke. His voice was low, rough, as gravel dragged across stone, but steady. "Life," he said, "don't need your blessing to matter." The words struck like a bullet. The preacher's face flushed, lips pulling tight. With a spit in the dust and a muttered curse, he turned, climbed into his wagon, and drove off in a storm of indignation. Silence reclaimed the yard. Elias set the hammer aside and went back to his work as though nothing had passed, though the weight of his words lingered in the air like thunder long after lightning. That night, the stars scattered like shards of glass across the sky. Mira stood outside, the triplets finally asleep, the cool air wrapping around her. She stared upward, tears shimmering at the corners of her eyes. When Elias stepped onto the porch, she turned. Her voice trembled, but carried a strength he could not. "Miss, thank you." He regarded her in silence, the shadows of the night deepening the hollows of his face. Her tears slipped free, glinting in the starlight. "No one's ever stood for me." Not once. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Their eyes held. Her broken hope, his buried pain, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with survival. It was not yet love, not yet trust, but a spark in the ash, a whisper in the dust. The silence between them no longer felt empty. It hummed, alive, as if the land itself had begun to breathe again. Night pressed down heavy on the ranch. The sky was black velvet stretched wide, broken only by a crescent moon and the faint scatter of stars. A restless wind shifted through the brittle grass, carrying scents of smoke, iron, and the unspoken. Inside the house, Mira nursed her daughters. By the dim glow of the hearth, the soft sound of their breaths filling the hollow rooms. Elias sat at the table, oiling the barrel of his shotgun in silence. His ear tilted ever so slightly, as though listening to something far beyond the walls. Then he stilled. Faint at first. The crunch of hooves, many. The rhythm of men who did not ride for trade or prayer, but for ruin. A burst of sharp laughter, cut through the night, carried cruelly by the wind. Elias set the gun aside, rose with the quiet certainty of a man who had known this moment would come. Without a word, he crossed the room, opened the door, and stepped out into the night. Mira rose, clutching her children close, heart thundering. Through the crack of the door she saw them, torches flaring like venomous fangs in the dark, a swarm of riders cutting across the yard. Shadows danced across their faces, hard, bitter, hungry for blood. At their head rode her husband's kin, men who bore the same family lines as her daughters, but none of their innocence. "Hand her over, Cain." One spat, voice thick with rage. "Hand over the cursed brood, before worse befalls you. End it now, before the plague spreads further." Elias stood tall in the doorway, the moon throwing his shadow long across the dust. His shotgun hung steady in his grip. The firelight of their torches burned across the scars of his face, but his eyes were colder than the night itself. Behind him, Mira's breath caught, her body trembling. She pressed the girls tighter against her chest, as if sheer will might make them vanish into safety. A silence stretched. Coyotes howled in the far hills, as if mocking the living. Then Elias spoke, low, almost to himself, but clear enough to slice through the night. "You'll ride home empty." The words landed. Heavy, final. The men bristled, curses flying. Then came the crack of a rifle. A shot rang out, sparking off the wood of the porch. In an instant, the night erupted. Gunfire split the dark, thunder without rain. The ranch's edges caught flame from a torch hurled wild, fire racing up the eye. Dryboards, painting the sky in red and black. Horses screamed. The air filled with smoke, sparks, and the metallic taste of war. Elias fired back with ruthless precision, each shot deliberate, cold, unflinching. One man fell hard from his saddle, another cursed as his arm jerked back, weapon dropped. But numbers pressed and flames spread, and chaos clawed at the fragile sanctuary. Mira ducked low inside, clutching her daughters, eyes stinging from smoke. She could hear Elias grunt, a sound raw, pained. She turned and saw him stagger, hand pressing his shoulder, blood already soaking through the fabric. Still, he did not fall. He reloaded, fired again, moved with the endurance of a man whose life was carved by grief and battle. The riders cursed, their fury breaking against his will. One by one they faltered, retreating into the night, their torches dwindling like hateful stars across the horizon. Soon only smoke remained, the ground littered with spent shells and ash. Elias leaned heavy against the post, shotgun slipping from his grip. Blood trailed down his arm, dark against his skin. Mira rushed forward, the babies still wailing behind her. She tore strips from her own dress, hands trembling only at first. Then they steadied, working with desperate precision. She pressed the cloth to his wound, tying it tight, her breath coming fast. Her face hovered close to his, her eyes shining with fear and something deeper. Why? Her whisper cracked in the smoke. Why do you fight for us? His jaw tightened, breath ragged. For a moment, she thought he might not answer. That silence was all he had left. But then his eyes met hers, steady, despite the pain. His voice came hoarse, low, pulled from a place of old wounds. 'Cause someone should have fought for mine. The words cut through her, sharp as a blade, yet warm as fire. She felt them in her bones, in the hollows of her heart, where abandonment had carved deep scars. Her hands lingered on his chest, feeling the slow, uneven beat beneath. Outside, the flames still licked the edges of the barn, but dawn had not yet come. Smoke curled into the sky, carrying with it the ashes of a battle. Survived. Mira tightened the bandage, her tears falling into the dust. Inside the house, her daughter's cries quieted at last, as if the storm itself had been driven away. The ranch bore its wounds in silence. Black scars ran along the barn's beams. Fence posts smoldered to ash, and the earth was littered with the husks of spent shells. Smoke no longer rose, but the smell clung to the place like memory. Charred wood, blood, and sweat ground into dust. Mira moved carefully through the ruins, her daughters tied against her chest and hip, their small breaths warm against her skin. Each creak of the half-burned porch seemed to whisper what she already feared. She had brought ruin here. She paused at the threshold, looking back at Elias. He was binding up new boards with one good arm, the bandage on his shoulder already stained through. His jaw was set, his silence heavy as stone. At last she spoke. Her voice shook, though she tried to hold it steady. I should go. If I stay, they'll only come again. You'll lose what little you have left because of me. Elias didn't turn from his work. He drove another nail home with a hammer's crack. Only when the echo faded did he straighten, his breath slow, his gaze fixed on the horizon. This place is yours as much as mine. The words fell like iron, rare and unyielding. She wanted to argue, but the weight in his tone left no room for protest. Still, doubt gnawed. She feared becoming another burden chained to a man already drowning in ghosts. And in the hollows of his silence, Elias feared something too. That if he spoke his truths, they might cut too deep to ever be mended. Beyond the ranch stretched a narrow river, winding like a vein of silver through the dust. Mira often went there, barefoot, skirts brushing along the grass, her daughters crawling and laughing near the water's edge. She would stand with her toes in the current, watching how it moved, quiet but unstoppable, carrying itself forward no matter what stones split its path. Sometimes she whispered to it, as if the river might answer, "If I can be like you, I'll survive." Elias never joined her, but from a distance, mending fence, watering horses, leaning in his silent way against a post, he watched. The sight of her standing there, hair loose in the wind, children giggling at her ankles, stirred something buried long ago. He wanted to step closer, to speak, to let his voice reach her like the water's song. Yet restraint held him fast. Then the storm came. The first drops fell sharp as pebbles. By dusk, the sky split open with lightning, rain hammering the earth until it turned to mud. Winds clawed at the house, shaking its bones, and the river swelled wild, rushing against its banks like a beast freed. For 3 nights, the storm raged. Elias kept the fire lit, feeding it until the hearth glowed defiant against the roar outside. The house groaned with each gust. Mira huddled with the girls, her laughter faint and nervous as she tried to distract them from the thunder. The closeness of the walls, the hiss of rain against glass, bound them tighter than the wide silence ever had. On the second night, Mira found herself watching him across the firelight. His face flickered between shadow and flame, lines carved, deep by time and grief. She thought of the way he'd stood against riders, his blood soaking the dust, and something in her chest ached. By the third night, her heart could no longer hold what trembled inside it. Lightning cracked, white fire spilling through the windows. The thunder rolled so loud the walls shivered. Mira turned toward Elias, voice breaking through the storm. "I thought love was chains," she whispered, clutching her shawl tight. "I thought it meant being bound, smothered, until there was nothing left of me. But here," she drew a shuddering breath, "here, I can breathe." The silence that followed was nearly unbearable. She could hear only the fire's hiss, the storm's howl, her own heartbeat in her throat. Elias did not look up at first, staring into the flames as if searching for something lost. When at last he lifted his gaze, the storm seemed to pause. His eyes, scarred by sorrow yet steady, met hers. His voice came low, rough as gravel but clear, each word carved slow. "I don't love skin." His breath caught. "I love what breathes under it." The words struck like thunder, raw and forbidden. Mira's breath faltered, her chest rising fast. The world outside seemed to vanish. The river swollen, the wind howling, all drowned beneath the fragile, dangerous truth between them. Her daughters stirred in their sleep, soft sighs against her arms, as if the storm itself bowed to the quiet inside the room. Neither reached across the fire, not yet. But something unspoken crossed the space between them, a current as steady as the river itself, unseen, unstoppable, cutting through stone. The night split open with fire. At first it was only the distant rumble of hooves, low as thunder rolling across the desert. Then the glow of torches flared against the horizon, snaking their way toward the ranch like a river of flame. Mira pressed her daughters close, their small bodies stirring against her chest. She knew that sound, that smell, the promise of ruin returning. Elias was already outside. His figure stood against the wind, hat low, shotgun in hand, a lone sentinel before the house scarred by so many storms. His shoulder still bore the wound of the last fight, but he did not waver. Beside him, the lantern, light flickered, catching the hard lines of his face, the quiet fury carved into every breath. The riders came fast, their laughter sharp, cruel. Among them, Mira recognized faces, her husband's kin, eyes drunk with hate, mouths spitting curses about the cursed brood. But this time, they weren't alone. Hired guns rode with them, coats black, rifles strapped across their backs, the stench of coin heavy in their eyes. "Can't hide her forever, Cain," one of the men hollered, torch lifted high. "The land don't forgive witches, and you'll burn with her." Elias shifted the shotgun, voice low, gravel scraping the night. "You rode here to die." The words struck colder than steel. The clash was sudden, violent. Torches hurled against the barn, flames bursting into the night. Gunfire tore through silence, bullets shattering the windows, biting into the walls. The babies screamed, their cries piercing the storm of noise. Mira dragged them beneath the heavy table, arms wrapped tight, her heart slamming against her ribs. Elias fired, each blast sharp, unrelenting. Men tumbled from saddles, dust choking the air. But numbers pressed hard, shots rattling like hail. One bullet caught him in the side, another carved across his shoulder. He staggered, boots sinking into blood and dirt, but he did not fall. Not yet. Through the smoke, Mira saw him falter, saw the red bloom spreading across his shirt. Something. Inside her cracked, the same place that had once been broken by exile, by shame, by silence. But this time, it did not break into weakness. It broke into fire. Her hands shook as she pulled the rifle from above the hearth. She had never fired it. But the weight felt right. Cold iron. Solid as the promise she had made the moment her daughters first breathed. When a rider kicked down the door, gun raised toward the table, Mira rose from the shadows like a flame. She aimed, breath trembling, and fired. The man dropped heavy, his torch rolling across the floorboards. Smoke filled her lungs, tears blurred her eyes, but she did not lower the gun. "Stay back," she cried, voice raw, splitting the chaos. "You'll not take them. You'll not take what's ours." For a moment, the fight slowed. The sight of her standing there, blood streaked across her face, daughters wailing behind her, rifle steady in her grip. It struck something in the men. Some sneered, some cursed, but doubt cut through the heat. Outside, Elias still fought, though his knees buckled, though his shirt hung dark with blood. He carved through them with the last of his strength, every shot a vow. But at last he stumbled, falling to one knee, shotgun slipping from his hand. Dust clung to his face, blood dripping into the soil. Mira screamed his name, the sound tearing from her throat. She dragged the rifle back to her shoulder, firing again, until the last of the riders broke, fear chasing them into the dark. The bounty men, seeing coin slip into smoke, turned their horses, spitting into the dirt before vanishing into the horizon. And then, silence. Only the crackle of fire remained, the low sobs of children, the rattled breaths of a man bleeding into the dust. Mira stumbled through the doorway, rifle dropping from her hands. She fell to her knees beside Elias, grasping his hand, his blood warm against her palms. His eyes fluttered open, hollow and dim, but still burning with the ember of his will. His lips parted, voice hoarse, barely more than breath. "Don't. Let him take what's ours." Her tears fell hot onto his chest. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering fiercely through her sobs. "They won't. I swear it. I swear." The night lingered heavy, the house broken, smoke curling toward the stars. But with every breath, every sob, every heartbeat shared between them, dawn crept closer. When the sun finally broke, it rose red against the dust. The riders were gone. The ranch was scarred, half burned, but it still stood. Elias, pale and trembling, leaned against her shoulder as she guided him inside. Each step was agony, but he did not fall. She would not let him. The triplets cried, hungry, alive, the sound piercing the ruin like bells. Mira soothed them with one hand while steadying Elias with the other. Her body shook, her dress torn, but her spirit did not yield. Later, when the fire had died down to embers and the ranch lay in weary stillness, she carried water from the river. Her daughters played in the dust at her feet, small hands grasping at the sunlight. Elias sat on the porch, arm bandaged, gaze distant but alive. Mira knelt in the dirt, her hands pressing seeds into the soil. Each grain was a prayer, each motion a vow that from this scarred earth something new would rise. Above them, a hawk circled high, its wings wide against the morning sky, free, unbound, untouchable. The wind shifted, warm now, carrying not just the scent of ash, but of water, of grass beginning to stir. From ashes they built a dawn no one could take away.